Symbiosis and its Discontents, Fusion, Merger, and the Fragmented Self by Brian Nandy. How can Blass and Blatt's two kinds of symbiosis, fusion for separateness and merger for attachment, explain the failures to form a stable self? This paper uses Blass and Blatt's two kinds of symbiosis, fusion for control and merger for closeness, as the foundational concepts to analyze Ed Gein's bond with his mother and explain how it contributed to a breakdown in symbolic thinking and a fragile sense of self, drawing on Freud, Klein, Winnicott, Kohut, Spotnitz, Piaget, and Geltner's countertransference theory. What is symbiosis? In psychoanalysis, symbiosis has a different meaning from the biological definition. It is not two creatures helping each other survive. It is about an early emotional bond between a baby and a mother before the baby knows, where they end and the other begins. Blass and Blatt, 1996. Margaret Mahler called this stage undifferentiation. From the infant's point of view, they do not yet have a defined sense of self. The baby is not discovering where they begin. Their developmental task is to discover where they end and the mother begins, that there is an other outside of them. It is a movement from fusion to separation. The baby's world is merged with the mother. The baby cannot tell the difference between hunger and the breast, the self and the mother. The baby experiences mother and self as one, sharing warmth, touch, and safety. However, with experience, the mother's presence and absence, the baby slowly realizes, oh, that feeling, that sound, that comfort comes from outside of me. That realization becomes the end of symbiosis. The baby discovers where I end. Mahler et al., 1975. A feeling of oneness is a given. However, if that separation is not developed, the person can struggle with blurred boundaries, unsure how to feel connected without disappearing, or separate without feeling abandoned. Blass and Blatt, 1996. Freud, Winnicott, and the Beginnings of Self. Sigmund Freud, 1914, described the earliest stage of life as primary narcissism, where a baby believes the world exists to meet their needs. Everything feels like an extension of the self. As care becomes more consistent, the baby discovers that others have minds and desires too. This realization begins the process of object love, which is the ability to love someone as separate from oneself. Freud, 1914. Donald Winnicott, 1953, expanded this idea with the good enough mother. He said a healthy caregiver does not have to be perfect, just reliable enough to meet the baby's needs most of the time. The baby learns to trust via the pattern recognition of meeting, missing, and repairing. Winnicott called this the creation of a holding environment where the child can begin to exist separately, yet feel safe knowing they are cared for and remembered, even when the caregiver is not physically there. Winnicott, 1953. Melanie Klein, The Good Breast and the Bad Breast. Melanie Klein, 1946, offered one of the earliest ideas about how babies understand love and hate. For the infant, the mother is experienced first through her breast, the source of nourishment, comfort, and frustration. When the baby is fed and soothed, the breast is experienced as good. When the baby is hungry or left waiting, the breast is experienced as bad. Klein, 1946. These oscillations are experienced as splits. The baby cannot yet understand that the same mother can be both loving and disappointing. Over time, with consistent care, the baby begins to integrate these two symbolic experiences. They learn that a person can be both good and bad, and that love can endure and survive frustration. This process, called integration of the object, lays the foundation for emotional stability and empathy. Klein, 1946. Blass and Blatt, Two Types of Symbiosis. Rachel Blass and Sidney Blatt, 1996, took Mahler's idea of symbiosis and refined it. They proposed that there are two forms of undifferentiated experience, fusion and merger, each with their own psychological purpose. Fusion is about oneness in the service of separateness, control, mastery, autonomy. Merger is about oneness in the service of attachment, closeness, belonging, love. These undifferentiated experiences of fusion and merger can develop in two lifelong ways. The separateness line, where we build independence and confidence, and the attachment line, where we build intimacy and mutual understanding. To illustrate modern psychoanalytic concepts like symbiosis, fusion, merger, and failed individuation, I will draw on the recent Netflix documentary monster, the Ed Gein story. Edward Theodore Gein, 1906 to 1984, was a quiet, small-town man whose horrific crimes shocked America. Although he appeared to be mild and polite, he lived a hidden life filled with obsession and delusion. His actions inspired famous horror characters like Norman Bates in Psycho, Leatherface in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs. The Netflix series Monster. The Ed Gein story portrays him as a monster in plain sight, as ordinary-looking but deeply disturbed. Gein was born in Wisconsin to George, a quiet alcoholic, and Augusta, a strict, punitive, shaming, and religious mother who believed women were sinful. She isolated Ed and his brother Henry on the family farm, filling their days with sermons about sin and punishment. When Henry, his older brother, died mysteriously in 1944 and Augusta passed away the next year, Ed's fragile world collapsed. He worshipped his mother as pure and holy, but he also feared her judgment, a split between what psychoanalyst Melanie Klein called the good breast and bad breast. Living alone after her death, Ed became obsessed with anatomy books and the female body. He kept his mother's room spotless like a shrine while the rest of the house was severely neglected. His pathological mind blurred fantasy and reality, a psychotic defense that made him believe he could magically control his harsh reality and erase his unbearable loss with delusional denial. In 1957, police arrested him for the murder of Bernice Wardens after finding her headless body in his barn. Inside his farmhouse, they discovered human organs in jars, furniture made from skin, and masks created from faces. Ed admitted to killing Bernice Wardens and Mary Hogan because they resembled his mother. Perhaps it was his attempt to overcome his unresolved ambivalent attachment, to keep and destroy the mother he had lost, but who still controlled him. Gein also admitted to robbing graves to create a female skin suit so he could become his mother. He was declared insane and spent the rest of his life in mental institutions till his death in 1984. Ed Gein's inner world was merged with his mother's. He did not experience himself and her as two separate people with different thoughts, needs, or boundaries. He depended on his mother and he was trapped by the tyranny of her superego. His fusion and oneness with his mother was not in the service of separateness or individuation. Ed Gein and the split self. Ed Gein grew up isolated with his controlling and religiously punitive mother. She taught him that women were dangerous and sinful, yet she was his only source of comfort. She was either the good breast or the bad breast, never both. Klein, 1946. When she died, he lost his only sense of safety and structure. Unable to see her as both loving and cruel, he could not grieve or let go of her as a whole person. Instead, he literally tried to bring her back by robbing graves, exhumed corpses, preserving body parts, and created a female skin suit. It was a delusional attempt to merge the good object, his mother, and destroy the bad part, his loneliness. Fusion and the illusion of power. Fusion is when your sense of me starts to blur and blend with someone or something. Blass and Blatt, 1996. For a short, trance-like moment, it can feel as if you and the other are one. Healthy fusion looks like creative flow, a musician lost in the music, an athlete in the zone. It is temporary yet energizing and empowering. Fusion strengthens one's sense of self, mastery of skill, focus, confidence, and joy without losing a stable sense of self. People often describe it as feeling absorbed, focused, locked in, effortless, confident, powerful, synchronized, and precise, like everything is in perfect alignment. Classical theory helps explain why this way of being can feel so tempting and compelling, and why it can go wrong. Freud wrote about the omnipotence of thoughts, the belief that wishes can control reality. Klein and Winnicott extended this into an early omnipotence fantasy, a felt oneness with the caregiver that gives a first sense of power. Piaget described magical thinking in children. These ideas clarify how fusion can sometimes slide from helpful focus into the illusion of total control. Unhealthy, pathological fusion tends to appear when someone is hurting or afraid. The high of oneness, symbiosis, becomes a way to escape pain, and the person begins to chase it, trying to force that closeness by controlling other people or the environment. As boundaries fade and reality gets blurry to protect the feeling, harm can follow. Basically, healthy fusion builds mastery. Unhealthy fusion erases boundaries. This distinction matters for understanding Ed Gein. Healthy fusion supports becoming a separate, capable person. Ed's fusion did the opposite. It fed an omnipotence fantasy, the belief he could undo death and control reality. Driven by anaclitic depression, dependent attachment, and desperation for closeness with his mother, he tried to recreate her through horrifying acts. Fusion and the illusion of power fits here because Ed's experience of fusion blurred boundaries, not growth, and led to a dangerous, fantastical illusion of a false sense of total control. The omnipotent, godlike power offers a grandiose sense of power and a relief from unbearable vulnerability. He exhumed corpses, dissected them, and reconstructed female body parts to create his female skin suit. This was an attempt to master the loss and helplessness that dominated him. Freud's idea of the omnipotence of thoughts fits here, because Ed clung to the illusion that his wishes could control reality in order to escape the pain of dependence. Ed's need to control and his brutality can be seen as narcissistic rage, an explosive reaction when someone feels deeply hurt or humiliated and turns that pain into attack. Kohut, 1972. Hyman Spotnitz says that people in narcissistic rage often use aggression and control to not feeling needy, dependency, and to not fall apart. When symbolic thinking collapses. Symbolic thinking is the mind's ability to use images and memories to represent real people and things, even when they are not present. It allows us to imagine, dream, and remember, to think about love without needing the person right in front of us. This capacity can fall apart when a person cannot tell the difference between imagination and reality, or between inner and outer worlds. After trauma or loss, when the mind cannot safely hold pain through memory or imagination, people may use make-believe fantasies to avoid mourning. As Winnicott, 1971, explained, transitional objects, like a blanket or doll, help bridge the gap between self and other, representing love even in absence. But Ed Gein could not do this. His early bond with his mother never allowed safe separation, so his symbolic thinking fell apart. Unable to mourn symbolically, Ed recreated a holding environment that mirrored his early experience, controlling, isolating, and suffocating rather than nurturing. His house became a psychotic nursery. Instead of holding her in memory, he tried to recreate her physically through morbid acts of grave robbing, wearing her undergarments, and the construction of the female skin suit. Borderline, narcissistic, and psychotic pathways. Blass and Blatt's framework helps us understand Gein's inner world along 3 developmental patterns. Borderline patterns equals desperate search for merger to avoid feeling empty or abandoned. Narcissistic patterns equals overuse of fusion to feel powerful and admired. Psychotic states equals total collapse of differentiation between self and other. Ed Gein's psyche lived mostly in psychotic states. His acts were not just crimes. They were attempts to repair a split that could not heal. Without a secure sense of separateness, he tried to control and unify literally in tragic ways. Countertransference and the relational mode. From Geltner's 2011 perspective, understanding Ed Gein's emotions would require sorting out which feelings belong to him and which are induced in us, the analyst. Ed's personal story evokes horror and sorrow, which is objective countertransference because it reflects his bifurcation story of love and terror. While watching the documentary, there were moments I found myself feeling the confusion he must have lived. Geltner also described the relational mode, which defines how the analyst and patient experience each other. They can experience each other as separate and distinct, object relational mode, or merged and undifferentiated, narcissistic mode. I would say that Gein's psychological life reflected a merged narcissistic relational mode, in this case, how the mother and child experienced each other. They shared the same feelings, where there was no difference between himself and the other. Gein internalized his mother so completely that she became part of his identity. Her critical voice, her fears, and her moral judgments lived inside him. He became her. She did not allow him to develop a stable sense of self separate from her. His secure individuation was never developed. Mahler et al., 1975. The Tragic Paradox. Blass and Blatt end their theory with a paradox, that a person can only truly experience oneness when we already know we are separate. For Ed Gein, separation meant death. To feel alive, he had to fuse again, even if it meant destroying others. He could not bear the truth that love requires differentiation. In healthy development, as Klein and Winnicott remind us, the child learns that the same person can be both loving and frustrating, both good and bad, and that love survives that tension. Ed Gein never reached that stage of integration. He lived caught between the good and bad breast, between worship and destruction. Final reflection. Ed Gein's story is horrifying, but psychoanalysis helps us see the tragedy behind it. A man trapped in a failed symbiosis, unable to hold love and loss in the same mind. He lived in a psychic reality where the good breast and bad breast never became one. Where love and terror fused in coexistence, his violence was not just sadistic, but also symbolic, an attempt to control and preserve the mother he could neither live with nor live without. As Winnicott might say, he never developed a self that could stand alone and play with reality. As Spotnitz would add, his outward destructiveness bore the mark of narcissistic rage. Unprocessed grief and shame turned into controlling aggression. Spotnitz, 1969. Healthy symbiosis teaches us the most human paradox of all. You and I are two, and we are one. Blass and Blatt, 1996. For Ed Gein, that truth was never possible. He wanted to feel completely one with his mother so badly that he stopped seeing people and himself as real, separate human beings. In chasing reunification, he lost his capacity for empathy, respect, and basic human limits, the very things that make us human.